Good morning, ambassadors, distinguished members of the OAS, and other participants. My name is Jaime Arias, and I am Tataume from Colombia. I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to contribute to the interactive dialogue on human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. I'm also pleased to have the opportunity to take the floor this morning. I speak at this session on behalf of the thematic coalition of peoples, and although governments and indigenous peoples have the right to represent our peoples, the OAS has enabled me to take the floor as one single voice today. As a result, I would like to express the concerns of this broad coalition of peoples and indigenous nations. We speak of one very important fact, and that is the need for member states to actually undertake their commitments in the draft declaration of the rights of indigenous peoples. The draft declaration was undertaken in 2016, and it represented arduous work, complex negotiations amongst the states, the member states, and the indigenous peoples. And as a result, this is a useful instrument that reinforces the current state of the human rights of indigenous peoples. However, today, initially, the member states of the OAS refused to allow the participation of human rights in the process, in the negotiation process. But thanks to the tolerance of indigenous peoples and the support of Antigua and Barbuda, Canada, and the United States, we, together with the Ambassador of Canada, were able to open the OAS door and to reinforce our right to negotiate face-to-face with the member states and so as to ensure to have NGOs take part with the OAS. Our indigenous contributions to the OAS have led to the strongest and most useful results, such as the American Declaration, which recognizes the role of our organizations and our right to self-government and free determination, as well as to ensure the well-being and the future of our peoples. The declaration is indicative of the good faith of the countries concerning our good practices. However, we still recognize that there's a lot to be done. Indigenous peoples of the region continue to be the poorest of the poor, and the violence against indigenous women has reached epidemic levels. Indigenous peoples that living in voluntary isolation are forced to have contact with the outside world. Indigenous groups that are facing armed conflicts are living terrible situations. Those who live in contact with the extractive industry are also facing terrible situations. They are being murdered because they want to protect their lands. In March, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights informed that just in 2017, 14 defenders of human rights were murdered. Almost half of those victims were indigenous leaders, and this is unacceptable. Although there are still many problems in the region, we have an opportunity to do something about this. We must be able to guarantee the human rights of the indigenous peoples, regardless of their cultures, languages, or living standards. The impact and value of the declaration speaks to a serious commitment by member states to work together with indigenous peoples so as to ensure this. As a result, we must have mechanisms in the OAS that are able to respond to problems or serious issues in terms of lands and indigenous resources, protection of the environment, and the self-government of indigenous communities, as well as the health of indigenous peoples. We must also indicate that the declaration needs to be effective and contribute better and permanent improvements for our lives. Finally, in the same way that the Assembly General of the OAS, through its Commission on Juridical and Legal and Political Matters, needs to include on its agenda the implementation of the declaration so that member states can consult with Indigenous peoples. We also need to call on member states of the OAS so that we undertake a special conference in which we consult Indigenous peoples and member states on the best way to implement the American Declaration. We are aware of the proposal and of a plan of action on the American Declaration and on the rights of the human rights of Indigenous peoples, and we urge that this be taken into account for implementation. We would call on the countries that have not fully supported the American Declaration so that they do that immediately. Indigenous peoples cannot wait longer for a recognition of their rights. We believe that concrete actions must be taken to ensure the achievement of the American Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Thank you very much.